Hello, friend. Welcome to Science for Sleep. Tonight, we are stepping into a very unusual corner of reality. Not a world of fantasy and not a world of folklore, but a world made of true things that happen all around us. Quiet things, strange things, things that sound as if someone must have exaggerated them, or misunderstood them, or made them up entirely. And yet, they are real. The world is full of facts that seem to lean just a little too far away from common sense. Your own brain, for example, quietly edits parts of your vision every moment of the day. An octopus can taste with its arms. Some deserts can make low singing sounds when the sand begins to move. None of that sounds especially likely at first. But the deeper you look, the more reality begins to loosen its usual shape. That may be part of what makes the world feel so endlessly interesting. Much of what seems ordinary only seems that way because we have grown used to it. We wake up inside a body that turns light into color, pressure into touch, and air into sound. We walk through landscapes that hum, glow, shift, and breathe in ways we rarely stop to notice. We live among animals whose senses seem to belong to another version of existence entirely. And once in a while, science does not make the world feel smaller. It makes it feel even stranger. If you enjoy these quiet journeys, you're welcome to subscribe. And if it feels natural, to leave a comment sharing where you're listening from tonight. It helps others find their way to this calm corner of the world, one sleepy traveler at a time. The quiet continues here, just as it is. For now, though, there is nothing you need to solve, nothing you need to remember perfectly. You can simply listen and let each fact arrive the way a small light might appear in the distance, softly, one after another. Even vision, which feels so direct and dependable, is already more mysterious than it seems. Each of your eyes has a blind spot, a small place where the optic nerve leaves the retina. That area cannot detect light at all. In a literal sense, there is a tiny hole in what each eye can see. And yet, you do not move through the day noticing black gaps floating in front of you. Your brain fills them in automatically, borrowing clues from the world around them and quietly building a complete picture. So even now, as your eyes move across a room, a screen, or the dim space around your bed, part of what seems solid and seamless is being gently invented for you. Then there is the octopus, an animal so unusual it can feel almost imagined. Along each of its arms are suckers lined with chemical sensors. When an octopus touches a rock, a shell, or a piece of prey, it is not only feeling shape and texture, it is also tasting the surface. The sea floor becomes something like a map of flavor and touch combined. What seems to us like a simple reaching motion is, for the octopus, a rich stream of information. And far from the sea, in dry and open places, sand itself can become unexpectedly alive with sound. In some deserts, under very specific conditions, shifting grains can produce deep humming or booming tones. The grains need to be just the right size, just the right dryness, just the right shape. When they slide together in large numbers, the dune can seem to sing. A hillside of sand, warmed all day by sunlight, can suddenly sound like a distant instrument played by no visible hand. These are not exceptions to reality. They are part of it. And that is what makes tonight so calming in a way. The world does not need to be invented to become strange. It already is, Beneath the surface of ordinary life, there are hidden processes, unfamiliar senses, and quiet facts waiting almost everywhere. A body, a landscape, a patch of sky, a handful of dust. Each one can hold something that sounds impossible until you look a little closer. Tonight, we will do exactly that. That quiet closeness begins with something very simple. Most of us move through the day trusting that sight is direct. Light enters the eyes, the world appears, and that is that. It feels immediate, almost effortless, as though seeing were just the passive act of receiving what is already there. But sight is not passive at all. It is active, selective, and full of quiet corrections. Each eye, on its own, contains a blind spot. This is the place where the optic nerve leaves the retina and carries visual signals toward the brain. At that exact point, there are no light-sensitive cells, no rods, no cones, no actual seeing. If the eye worked like a camera alone, that gap would appear as a small missing patch in the middle of life, a steady little absence floating wherever you looked. But that is not what happens. The brain notices the surrounding patterns, colors, edges, and textures, and fills the space in for you. It performs a soft repair so quickly that the missing area disappears into the rest of the scene. The room remains whole. The page remains whole. The night remains whole. It is a gentle reminder that perception is not only about receiving information, it is also about completing it. Even the image that reaches the retina begins in a form that would seem wrong to us. Because of the shape of the eye's lens, the image projected onto the retina is upside down. Light from the top of the world lands lower in the eye, and light from the bottom lands higher. Left and right are reversed as well. That sounds impossible at first, because it raises an obvious question. If the image arrives that way, why does the world not appear inverted all the time? The reason is that the brain does not simply display raw input, it interprets it. Over time, it learns the stable relationship between the body and the world, and it presents a coherent version of what is out there. This process begins so early in life that it feels natural, even though it is doing something extraordinary. In experiments, people who wear goggles that flip their vision can gradually adapt. After enough time, the brain begins adjusting again, building a new stable picture from unusual input. What feels fixed is actually flexible. The visual world is steadier than the signals that created it. And then there is color, one of the most familiar parts of daily life, and also one of the strangest. It feels as though color belongs to objects themselves. A strawberry seems red in the same simple way that a stone seems solid. But color is not stored inside the strawberry like a hidden paint. What exists outside the body is light of different wavelengths. The eyes detect parts of that light, and the brain transforms those signals into the experience we call color. Red is not sitting on the fruit waiting to be collected. Red is an event that happens inside perception. In darkness, the strawberry does not stop being itself, but the redness disappears because the necessary light is gone. The object remains, while the color as experience fades away. So what seems like one of the clearest features of reality is already a partnership between the world outside and the nervous system within. Even stillness in vision is not as still as it feels. Your eyes are never fully motionless. Even when you believe you are staring at one fixed point, they make tiny movements called microsaccades. These are extremely small shifts, almost too slight to imagine, yet they matter a great deal. If the eyes truly froze in place, the visual image would begin to fade. Cells in the retina respond most strongly to change, so unchanging input can start to disappear from awareness. Those tiny movements keep the image fresh. They help edges remain visible. They stop the world from dissolving into a blur of sameness. So the calm sight of a quiet room, a dim lamp, a curtain, or a ceiling at night depends in part on constant motion, so small you never feel it happening. This is the strange tenderness of perception. It does not hand you the world in one perfect piece. It gathers fragments. It flips and fills. It interprets light. It refreshes what would otherwise fade. It offers not a raw copy of reality, but a stable version shaped for living inside. And once that begins to settle in, the familiar world starts to feel a little softer around the edges. Not less real, just more carefully assembled than it first appears. What seems immediate has already passed through layers of quiet work. And sight is only the beginning. Sight may be the beginning, but it is not the only sense shaped by quiet interpretation. The same pattern continues through the rest of perception. What feels immediate is often carefully assembled. What feels obvious is often partly guessed. The body gathers signals, and the brain turns them into something smooth enough to live inside. Taste is a gentle example of this. It seems simple at first. You put food on the tongue, and flavor appears. But much of what we call flavor does not come from the tongue alone. The tongue can detect a few basic qualities such as sweet, sour, salty, bitter, and umami. The richer details, the part that makes vanilla feel different from strawberry or mint different from basil, depend heavily on smell. As you chew, tiny molecules travel upward through the back of the mouth into the nose, where smell receptors help build the full experience. That is why food can seem so dull during a cold. The ingredients have not changed, but the missing smell removes much of what flavor normally feels like. A bowl of soup becomes flatter. Fruit loses part of its brightness. Tea becomes warmer and softer, but less complete. What seems like one single sensation turns out to be a quiet partnership between different systems working together. Even sight can shape taste in ways that seem almost unfair. In experiments, people have described identical foods and drinks differently depending on color alone. A drink dyed one shade may seem sweeter, while the same drink in another shade may seem sharper or more sour. The body is not simply receiving flavor, it is preparing for it. It uses expectation, memory, and appearance to make a prediction, and that prediction becomes part of the experience itself. So a familiar color can nudge the senses before the first sip even arrives. A bright red drink can suggest fruit. A green one can suggest lime or mint. The flavor that follows may feel direct, but part of it has already been shaped by what the eyes quietly suggested. Color itself continues to behave in ways that feel less like fixed truth and more like active balance. If you stare at one color for long enough, then look away at a blank surface, you may see its opposite appear for a moment. A red shape can leave behind a green ghost. Blue can give way to yellow. This happens because the cone cells in the eyes, which respond to color, become briefly tired after steady stimulation. When you shift to a neutral surface, the less tired opposing signals stand out more strongly, and the brain produces an afterimage. For a few seconds, something that is not there appears gently in front of you, as if the eye were still holding the memory of what it just saw. It is one more reminder that perception is not fixed at the surface. It keeps adjusting itself, rebalancing the world every moment. At the edges of vision, another quiet trade takes place. Peripheral vision is not especially good at seeing sharp detail or rich color. The center of the visual field handles that work far better, but the outer regions are excellent at something else. They are highly sensitive to movement. A slight flicker at the edge of sight can pull attention immediately, even before you know what moved. This is part of why something shifting in a dark room, a curtain, a branch, a shadow, or the soft movement of a pet can catch awareness so quickly. The edges of sight are not there to admire fine detail. They are there to notice change. In dim light, this becomes even more noticeable. Color recedes, sharpness softens, but movement remains important. The body still scans quietly for what shifts, what stirs, what enters the edge of awareness. It is a soft vigilance built into perception, one that continues even when the room is nearly still. And taken together, these facts begin to change the feeling of the senses themselves. They are not simple windows standing open to the world. They are more like skilled interpreters. They compare signals, they blend them. They fill what is missing. They prepare expectations before experience arrives. They adjust constantly, often so gently that the work disappears from notice. This does not make the world less real. If anything, it makes reality feel more delicate and more intricate. Flavor is helped by smell. Color can linger after it is gone. Motion matters more than detail at the edges. The body is always deciding what to emphasize and what to soften, what to hold steady and what to let fade. And once you begin to notice that, the world starts to feel less like a simple display and more like a conversation between the outside and the body receiving it. That conversation becomes stranger still when we leave human perception behind and begin to notice how other creatures sense the world around them. Once human perception begins to feel less solid and straightforward, the rest of the living world starts to open in a different way too. Other creatures are not simply using weaker or stronger versions of our own senses. In many cases, they are living inside entirely different sensory worlds, guided by signals we barely notice or cannot detect at all. A butterfly is a soft place to begin, because it seems so light and delicate, almost decorative as it moves through a garden. But when a butterfly lands on a leaf or flower, it is not simply resting there, it is tasting. Butterflies have chemoreceptors on their feet, which means they can detect certain chemicals just by standing on a surface. A female butterfly searching for a place to lay eggs can land on a plant and gather information almost at once. Is this the right species? Will the caterpillars be able to eat it? Is it safe? The answer begins not in the mouth, but in the feet. So what looks like an ordinary landing is really a moment of inspection. The leaf is not just touched, it is sampled. Fish too move through a world that feels ordinary to them, and strange to us. Many species have a sensory system called the lateral line, which runs along the sides of the body. This system is made of tiny fluid-filled canals and sensitive cells that detect movement and pressure changes in the water. A fish can sense the approach of another animal, the disturbance caused by a predator, or the shifting pattern of nearby motion without needing to see it directly. In cloudy water, in darkness, or beneath the surface where visibility is poor, that quiet sensitivity becomes a kind of map. A river that may look dim and featureless to us is full of moving information to a fish. Each small pressure wave becomes part of the surrounding shape of the world. The water is not empty space. It is textured with motion. Owls offer another version of this hidden precision. Their hearing is so refined that some species can locate prey in near total darkness using sound alone. Part of the reason lies in the structure of the face, which acts like a soft dish gathering sound inward. But another part lies in the ears themselves. In many owls, the ears are positioned slightly unevenly on the head. One sits a little higher than the other. That asymmetry allows the brain to compare tiny differences in timing and loudness as sound reaches each ear. From those differences, the owl can judge not only where something is from side to side, but also whether it is higher or lower. A mouse moving beneath leaves, grass, or even a thin layer of snow can become visible through sound. The forest floor may seem still, but to the owl, it is full of faint coordinates, a low rustling geometry laid across the dark. Then there are elephants, whose world stretches far beyond what human hearing usually allows. Elephants produce and detect very low-frequency sounds called infrasound. These deep vibrations can travel through air and ground over long distances, much farther than ordinary calls. A herd may respond to another group miles away before either is visible. Some of these vibrations can also be felt through the sensitive tissues of the feet and body. So the message is not only heard, it is sensed through contact with the ground itself. That means an open plain may carry conversations we do not notice at all. To us, the distance may seem quiet. To elephants, it may still be full of social presence, warning, direction, and reassurance. What is so calming about these facts is not only that they are surprising, it is that they widen the idea of what a world can be. A flower becomes a place that can be tasted with feet. Water becomes a field of invisible pressure. Darkness becomes something detailed enough to hunt through. The ground itself becomes a path for distant voices. And none of this is fantasy. It is simply life adapted in different directions. The garden, the river, the forest, the plain. Each one holds layers that human senses only partly reveal. Animals are moving through those layers constantly, guided by structures evolved over vast stretches of time. They do not find these powers unusual. To them, this is just the shape of reality. It is the ordinary texture of being alive, which makes the whole planet feel a little gentler and a little stranger. Not because it is hiding magic, but because it is already full of forms of perception so different from our own that they almost sound imagined when spoken aloud. And these are only the senses we can begin to describe. Beyond them are still stranger kinds of seeing. Those stranger kinds of seeing begin with light itself, because light is already much wider than human vision allows. What we call the visible world is only a narrow band of the full electromagnetic spectrum. It feels complete to us because it is all we have ever known. Blue sky, green leaves, red fruit, grey clouds. All of it seems like the full display. But many animals are not looking at the same version of the world at all. Bees are a quiet and beautiful example. To human eyes, a flower may appear simple, perhaps white or yellow or purple, soft in shape, familiar in color. But many flowers carry ultraviolet patterns that humans cannot see. Bees can. Their eyes are sensitive to ultraviolet light, which means that petals can contain bold visual markings hidden from us entirely. These markings often act like guides, leading the bee toward nectar and pollen. So the flower that looks plain to us may, to a bee, appear marked with glowing pathways and dark targets, almost like a landing strip laid across the petals. The garden is not only colorful, it is coded, and the bee moves through it as though reading signs written in a kind of light our eyes were never built to catch. Snakes, especially pit vipers and some of their relatives, inhabit another version of hidden reality. They possess heat-sensitive pit organs, usually located between the eye and the nostril, that allow them to detect infrared radiation. This does not mean they see warmth in exactly the same way humans see color, but it does mean they can form a sensory picture of heat differences in the world around them. A warm animal against a cooler background becomes much easier to detect, even in darkness. A mouse crossing a nighttime path may be nearly invisible in ordinary visual terms, but in the snake's sensory world, it gives off a clear signal. The cool ground, the cooler rocks, the cooler air all create contrast around the warmer living body. In darkness, where human sight quickly loses detail, the snake can still locate a source of life by the gentle radiation of heat. Birds widen the picture even further. Many birds are tetrachromats, which means they have 4 types of color receptors instead of the 3 humans usually rely on. That extra receptor often includes sensitivity to ultraviolet light. The result is not just better color, but a different experience of color entirely. Feathers that look ordinary to us may carry sharp visual signals to other birds. A fruit may stand out more strongly against leaves. Patterns in the sky, water, or landscape may separate in ways we do not perceive at all. This means that a bird flying through early morning light may be moving through a world richer in contrast and detail than our language can easily capture. What looks like a plain branch, a dull feather, or a simple berry to us may shine with signals related to health, species, age, or readiness to mate. The air itself becomes a place of hidden visual information, not because the world changed, but because the eye receiving it changed. Even a goldfish, an animal many people think of as familiar and simple, can remind us how narrow human sight really is. Goldfish can detect wavelengths outside the ordinary human visible range, including ultraviolet. In water, where light scatters and changes quickly with depth and angle, this sensitivity can help with contrast and awareness. A pond that appears murky or flat to us may carry far more separation between surfaces, motion, and reflection than we realize. So a small fish moving through an ordinary garden pond may not be inhabiting an ordinary visual scene at all. It may be navigating a place layered with signals that never rise into human awareness. The shimmer on the surface, the brightness beneath it, the sudden distinction between body and shadow, all of it may be more vivid and more structured than it appears from above. Taken together, these animals make one quiet point again and again. Reality is not a single picture waiting out there in finished form. It depends partly on the body receiving it. A flower can hold ultraviolet paths. A mouse can glow with warmth in darkness. Feathers can carry colors without human names. A pond can shimmer with information hidden from the eyes looking into it. And because of that, the world becomes both more modest and more astonishing. More modest because our own version of reality is clearly incomplete. More astonishing because incompleteness does not mean emptiness. It means there is more here than we notice. The same field, the same branch, the same evening air can contain several worlds at once, laid one inside another. A human world, a bee's world, a bird's world, a snake's world, all real, all happening together. And once that begins to settle in, it becomes easier to understand that nature is not strange because it breaks the rules. It is strange because the rules were always wider than we thought. After spending time with butterflies, owls, snakes, and birds, it might be tempting to imagine that the strangest sensory worlds belong only to other creatures. But the human body is not especially ordinary either. It simply feels ordinary from the inside because we have lived in it for so long. Once you slow down and look closely, even familiar sensations begin to seem slightly unreal, as though the body were doing quiet things behind the curtain that never reach everyday notice. One of the clearest examples is the phantom limb. When a person loses an arm, a leg, a hand, or a foot, the physical limb is gone, but the sensation of it can remain. Some people still feel the missing limb resting in a particular position. Others feel tingling, warmth, pressure, itching, or even pain. The missing hand may seem tightly closed. The missing foot may feel as though it is still touching the floor. These sensations are not imaginary in the careless sense of the word. They are real experiences produced by the nervous system. Part of the reason is that the brain contains an internal map of the body. That map does not vanish the moment the limb is lost. Signals change, pathways adjust, nearby regions begin to shift, but the older map can continue to produce a sense of presence. In some cases, touching another part of the body can even trigger sensations that seem to come from the missing limb, because the brain's arrangement of body regions is more intricate than it first appears. The result is deeply strange. The body can feel something that is no longer physically there. And yet, in another sense, this is happening all the time. What we feel is never the body in a raw, simple way. It is the brain's living interpretation of the body, updated constantly, but never perfectly. Something similar appears in spicy food, though in a gentler form. When people say they taste heat in a chili pepper, that is not quite accurate. The burning sensation from compounds like capsaicin is not a taste in the same way sweetness or saltiness is. Instead, capsaicin activates pain and heat receptors, the same general systems that respond to actual burning temperatures. The mouth is not truly on fire, but the nervous system is receiving a signal that resembles danger. That is why spicy food can make the eyes water, the skin flush, and the heart beat a little faster. The body is responding to what feels like a threat, even while the rest of the mind may know it is only dinner. The remarkable part is that many people come to enjoy this sensation. The body registers a warning, but the person interprets it as excitement, warmth, or pleasure. A bowl of food can become a quiet lesson in how sensation and meaning are not the same thing. The body also does something even stranger before touch arrives. It predicts it. Long before you fully notice a surface against your skin, your nervous system is already preparing for the expected pressure, texture, and weight. When you reach for a mug, a blanket, a doorknob, or the edge of a pillow, the brain uses past experience and motor planning to anticipate what the fingers are about to feel. This helps movement stay smooth and efficient. It lets the hand grip without too much force. It lets the body adjust before conscious awareness fully catches up. That predictive system is one reason surprises feel so sharp. When a surface is colder, rougher, heavier, or softer than expected, the body reacts strongly because the prediction was slightly wrong. Ordinary touch feels seamless partly because so much of it is prepared in advance. The sense of direct contact is, in some quiet way, already partly rehearsed. Then there are the lips, which many people do not think of as one of the body's most sensitive regions, though they very much are. The lips contain dense networks of nerve endings and very thin outer layers, making them highly responsive to texture, temperature, and pressure. A warm cup, a cold breeze, a drop of water, a soft fabric, all can be felt there with unusual sharpness. Their sensitivity helps with speech, eating, and social bonding. But it also means the lips receive the world with remarkable detail. This is why even a slight change in air, dryness, or warmth can be noticed almost immediately. The body does not meet the world evenly. Some surfaces are tuned far more finely than others. And when all of this is placed together, the human body begins to feel less like a fixed machine and more like a responsive field of interpretation. It can feel missing limbs. It can treat spice like fire. It can prepare for touch before it happens. It can gather enormous detail through something as small and familiar as the lips. None of this breaks the rules of biology. It is biology. But it carries that same quiet strangeness we have been following from the beginning. The body is not a passive object moving through the world. It is an active translator, forever shaping sensation into experience. And in some cases, it does that so subtly that reality itself begins to feel just a little dreamlike. That slight dreamlike quality does not end with pain, touch, or sensation. It continues into some of the strangest experiences the body can produce. The moments when perception feels almost truthful and misleading at the same time. Not false exactly, just shaped, adjusted, filtered through systems that are trying to keep life smooth, even when the result feels a little uncanny. Tickling is one of the gentlest examples. It is such a familiar sensation that people rarely stop to wonder why it behaves so strangely. A touch from someone else can make the body twist, laugh, or flinch almost at once. But if you try to tickle yourself in the same way, the effect is much weaker and often disappears almost entirely. The reason seems to be that the brain predicts the timing and nature of your own movements before they happen. Because the touch is expected, much of the surprise is removed before the skin even receives it. The sensation is still there, but the nervous system lowers its importance. It has already labeled the contact as self-generated, and so the body does not react with the same burst of alertness. This means ticklishness depends partly on uncertainty. The ribs, neck, feet, or sides do not become sensitive in the same way unless the body feels a small element of unpredictability. So even laughter can depend on the gap between what the brain expects and what the skin receives. Time, too, behaves strangely when the body is under pressure. Many people who have gone through frightening moments describe them as feeling slow, as if time stretched wider for a few seconds. A fall, a near miss, a sudden shock, and the world seems to open into a longer space than the clock would ever show. For a long time, it was tempting to imagine that the brain had somehow sped up its recording of events. But the truth appears softer and more subtle. During fear, attention narrows and memory becomes denser. The body releases stress chemicals and the mind stores more detail than usual. Later, when the moment is remembered, it feels longer because more was captured inside it. The event itself did not necessarily unfold in slow motion, but it left behind a richer imprint. A heartbeat filled with unusual detail can feel larger than a full minute of ordinary time. The body is not changing the clock. It is changing the weight of the moment passing through it. Then there is synesthesia, one of the most beautiful examples of blended perception. In some people, the senses overlap in stable and unusual ways. A sound may evoke a color. A number may carry a texture or personality. A day of the week may appear in a certain shade. A word may bring a taste. These experiences are not usually random. They tend to remain consistent over time, which suggests they are rooted in the way certain regions of the brain connect and communicate. For one person, a musical note may arrive with a flash of blue. For another, a name may feel softly golden or green. The outside world has not changed, but the sensory pathways joining it have formed a different pattern. What is especially calming about synesthesia is that it reminds us the boundaries between the senses are not as strict as they first appear. The mind is capable of weaving sound, sight, taste, and feeling together more tightly than ordinary experience suggests. Even touch and hearing are not fully separate. The body can feel sound vibrations through the skin, especially lower frequencies. A deep bass note in music can be sensed in the chest, the fingertips, or the floor beneath the feet. The ears still hear, of course, but the skin and tissues of the body are also receiving part of the event. Sound is not only something in the air, it is movement, pressure, vibration. This is why thunder can seem to arrive through the whole body, not just the ears. It is why engines, drums, distant trains, and heavy waves can feel physical even before they are fully heard. The body becomes a second listener, receiving the shape of sound through motion itself. In some people, and in some settings, that physical side of hearing becomes especially vivid. A room is no longer just filled with noise. It becomes gently alive with pressure and rhythm. And once these facts gather together, the body begins to seem less like a single stable observer and more like a layered field of interpretation. It softens self-generated touch. It thickens frightening moments with detail. It can blend one sense into another. It can hear through the skin. The ordinary experience of being alive is already full of illusions, but not the empty kind. They are useful illusions, adaptive ones, quiet adjustments that help the world feel coherent, even when the underlying processes are far more fluid. This is part of what makes biology so restful to think about. The body is not hiding a mechanical truth beneath experience. Experience is the truth it creates from signals, patterns, and predictions. And if that is true in animals and true in us, then it may not be surprising that even still life begins to blur at the edges too. Because once living systems start sensing, predicting, and responding so subtly, it becomes easier to notice that plants are not nearly as still as they seem. Once the body begins to feel less fixed than it first appeared, the living world around it changes too. Plants are often placed at the quietest edge of life in the human imagination. They seem still, patient, and almost passive. A tree stands where it stands. A vine climbs slowly. A flower opens without haste. Compared with animals, plants can seem nearly motionless, as though they belong more to background than behavior. But that impression comes mostly from our own timescale. Plants do respond to the world around them, and sometimes in ways that seem so fitting, so precise, that they almost appear intentional. Not because plants think in the human sense, but because life does not need a brain to be sensitive. It only needs structures that can register change and react to it. Touch is one of the clearest examples. Some plants alter their growth when they are brushed, bent, or disturbed again and again. Tendrils on climbing plants can curl around supports after contact. The sensitive plant, Mimosa pudica, famously folds its leaves inward when touched, changing shape within seconds. Even in slower growing species, repeated movement from wind, handling, or nearby contact can influence how stems strengthen or how the plant directs its growth. A rooted thing, unable to walk away, still does not ignore what reaches it. It feels change in its own quiet biological way. So a climbing stem winding around a fence, or a leaf folding after the lightest touch, is not just decoration in the garden. It is a response. Slow in some species, sudden in others, but real. Flowers, too, can hold signals hidden from human sight. As with the bees moving through the previous section, many blossoms contain ultraviolet patterns invisible to us. To human eyes, a petal may appear plain or softly colored. But under ultraviolet light, the same flower can reveal dark centers, bright pathways, and strong visual contrast. These markings help pollinators find nectar and pollen more efficiently. The flower is not only blooming, it is communicating through light beyond ordinary human vision. This gives even a quiet meadow a second layer of appearance. What seems simple to us may look carefully marked to the insects passing through it. The bloom is not just open, it is giving directions. Seeds offer another kind of strangeness, not through movement, but through waiting. Some seeds can remain dormant until highly specific conditions arrive. Moisture alone is not always enough. Temperature may need to shift in a certain pattern. Light may need to reach the seed after a fire or disturbance. In some species, the outer coat must be worn down, cracked, or exposed to smoke chemicals before germination can begin. Others wait through winter cold and only sprout after that long pause has passed. What makes this feel almost unreal is the patience of it. A seed can rest in darkness, apparently lifeless, while holding a strict set of requirements inside itself. It is not hesitating by accident. Its chemistry has been shaped so that growth begins only when the surrounding world gives the right signals. A dry hillside, a burned landscape, a patch of newly opened ground. These are not just places. To the seed, they are messages about timing. Then there are the chemical traces plants release into the air. Trees, grasses, herbs, and flowers do not exist in silence from a biological point of view. Many release volatile compounds, especially when stressed, cut, heated by sunlight, or touched by insects. Some of these compounds help attract pollinators. Others may discourage herbivores or even alert nearby plants to changing conditions. The air in a forest or field is not empty around living things. It carries an invisible haze of plant-made molecules, rising from bark, leaves, resin, flowers, and soil. This is part of why certain places have such distinct scents. The sharpness of pine in warm weather, the green smell of crushed grass, the sweetness of leaves after rain. These are not accidental perfumes laid gently over the land. They are part of plant life itself, molecules released through growth, damage, heat, and adaptation. Taken together, these facts make plants feel less like static scenery and more like participants in the living surface of the world. They respond to touch. They shape their blooms for pollinators using wavelengths we cannot see. They wait with astonishing discipline before beginning to grow. They release signals so quietly that we usually notice them only as scent. None of this requires us to exaggerate what plants are. They are not tiny people rooted in soil, but they are also not simple ornaments. They are living systems, deeply tuned to pressure, light, season, chemistry, and time. Their stillness is real, but it is not emptiness. It is a slower kind of activity, unfolding on scales that invite patience from anyone willing to notice. And once that slower activity becomes visible, forests and fields begin to feel less like backdrops and more like places where hidden processes are always underway, even when the land appears completely still. Once plants begin to feel more active, the places they live in start to change as well. A forest is no longer just a collection of trees. A field is no longer just open land. These places can hold patterns in air, scent, temperature, and light that feel almost unreal when first noticed. Not dramatic enough to seem impossible at a distance, perhaps, but strange enough that they can linger in memory long afterward. One of the gentlest examples is scent. Some forests produce sweet or unusual fragrances, even when no obvious flowers are nearby. A person walking through shaded trees may suddenly notice honey, fruit, spice, or something almost floral drifting through the air, even in seasons when blossoms are scarce. Part of this can come from tree resins, leaf compounds, soil microbes, or the slow breakdown of organic matter on the forest floor. When moisture, warmth, and air movement combine in a certain way, those compounds can gather and travel as a soft, invisible current. So the sweetness does not always have a clear single source. It may be emerging from bark, damp leaves, fungi, roots, and soil together. each contributing a small part. The forest can smell as though it has opened some hidden cabinet of perfume, even when nothing in view appears to explain it. Fields and open ground can also behave strangely with temperature. In some landscapes, there are patches of land that remain noticeably colder than the surrounding area, sometimes by several degrees. The difference may arise from air drainage, soil structure, moisture, or subtle underground pathways that let cooler air collect and linger. Cold air is heavier than warm air, so it can settle into low spaces and remain trapped there, especially on still nights or in sheltered terrain. But in some cases, the contrast feels sharper than expected, as though the ground itself were quietly holding a separate season. A person can walk across grass or soil and feel the shift over only a few steps. One patch feels ordinary, the next unexpectedly cool. The field looks calm and unchanged, yet it has divided the air into hidden zones. In older forests, temperature can become stranger still. Walkers sometimes describe passing through pockets of noticeably cooler air that seem to drift or shift through the woods. Part of this comes from the layered structure of the forest itself. Shade, moisture, soil, trunk spacing, leaf cover, and air movement all interact. Ancient forests especially can build very stable microclimates, where the air close to the ground behaves differently from the air a little higher up. A slight breeze may move coolness along one path while another area remains still. What makes it feel unusual is the softness of the boundary. A person moves forward, and the temperature changes without any obvious signal from the eye. The trees remain the same. The light remains dim and green, yet the air itself has become different. It is as if the forest has invisible rooms made not of walls, but of moisture and shade. And then there is light, or something very close to it. Under certain conditions, forest floors can glow faintly after heavy rain, or in places rich with decay, fungi, and chemical activity. Sometimes the source is bioluminescent fungi or microorganisms. In other cases, subtle chemical reactions in wet organic matter may contribute to a soft glimmer difficult to separate from living light. The glow is often weak, more a presence than an illumination, but it can be enough to make damp wood, soil, or decaying leaf litter seem gently awake in darkness. This does not turn the forest into a bright spectacle. It remains dark, still, and deeply quiet. But in that darkness, small processes continue. Water stirs buried chemistry. Fungi thread through dead wood. Cells and compounds exchange energy in ways too faint for daytime notice. What seems like simple wet ground can briefly become a surface holding its own pale trace of light. Taken together, these facts change the feeling of a landscape. A forest can release sweetness with no flower in sight. A field can hide cold in one patch and warmth in another. Old woods can shape drifting pockets of cool air. Rain-soaked ground can sometimes glow where life and decay meet in darkness. None of this requires fantasy. It only requires enough patience to notice that living places are never quite still. The air moves differently than it seems. The ground holds more variation than the eye can read. Even the dark can carry a faint response. And once that becomes clear, it feels natural to keep moving inward, toward the smaller and stranger forms of life working quietly beneath leaves, bark, and soil. where some of the most unreal facts of all begin to glow. That faint glow in the dark is a gentle way of entering one of the strangest parts of the living world. The smallest forms of life often seem the easiest to overlook. They live in bark, soil, damp wood, leaf litter, and quiet places where the eye does not linger for long. Yet once they are noticed, they can make the ordinary world feel almost impossible again. Some fungi glow in darkness, not brightly, and not in every case, but truly glow. Certain mushrooms and fungal threads produce a soft greenish light through a chemical process called bioluminescence. The light is cold, meaning it does not come from heat. It comes from molecules reacting in a way that releases energy as a visible glow. In the forest, this can make rotting wood, fallen branches, or damp bark seem faintly lit from within. The darkness remains mostly intact, but here and there, something living adds its own pale signal to the night. What makes this feel especially unreal is how quiet it is. There is no flame, no spark, no warmth, just a weak and steady light resting in fungus, the way color rests in a petal. It is a reminder that life does not always wait for the sun in order to be seen. In some cases, that glow does not remain perfectly constant. It may appear stronger or weaker depending on moisture, temperature, growth stage, or internal biological rhythms. Researchers have found that certain fungal glows can fluctuate, and in some organisms more broadly, light production may be influenced by cycles tied to the surrounding environment. Even when the changes are subtle, the effect feels strange. A patch of living material in the dark may not only glow, but shift gently in brightness over time, as if the forest floor were breathing in a language too faint for daylight. This is one reason these small forms of life feel so dreamlike. They are not only alive, they are active in ways that do not match the human picture of what life is supposed to look like. A fungus on a log does not just sit there. It grows, breaks down wood, sends out threads through hidden spaces, and in rare cases gives off light that seems too delicate to belong to biology at all. Bioluminescence, more generally, is one of nature's quietest miracles. It appears in fungi, but also in bacteria, algae, insects, and ocean life. In all of these cases, light is created through chemistry rather than fire. Molecules interact, energy is released, and a glow appears without heat. This means living things can shine without burning. The result can look magical, but the mechanism is real and physical, shaped by evolution over long stretches of time. In the sea, this can create brilliant displays. On land, it tends to be much dimmer and more hidden, but the principle is the same. Life has found ways to turn chemical energy into visible light. The air may be dark, the water black, the bark wet and silent, and still a living body may carry its own faint brightness. Even soil and decay can participate in these strange effects. Wet ground, rotting leaves, dead wood, and dense microbial communities are not passive leftovers from life. They are busy places. Bacteria feed, fungi spread, organic matter breaks down into simpler compounds. Minerals, moisture, oxygen, and living cells all meet in close contact. Under certain conditions, these combinations can produce faint glimmers, subtle chemical traces, or soft luminous effects that feel far too elegant to belong to decomposition. But decomposition is not emptiness. It is transformation. It is the quiet return of structure into other forms. Fallen wood becomes food. Leaves become soil. The dark floor of the forest is not dead space. It is a working layer full of exchange. That may be the most calming part of these facts. The smallest forms of life do not simply decorate the world. They hold it together. They digest what has fallen. They move nutrients through the land. They help shape scent, soil, moisture, and growth. And sometimes, in the middle of all that hidden labor, they glow. So the damp underside of a log, the dark line of a decaying branch, the soft wet hush beneath leaves, all may contain more activity than the eye first suggests. Tiny lives are moving through those surfaces constantly, carrying out processes older than human thought. Their scale is small, but their strangeness is not. And once that strange life in bark, wood, and soil becomes imaginable, it becomes easier to look upward again, toward the air above the trees, and realize that the sky has its own impossible-seeming facts waiting there too. After the dim world of fungi, wet bark, and soil, it feels natural to lift the attention upward again. Above the trees and fields, the air can seem simpler than the ground below. It looks empty by comparison, or at least cleanly open. A sky is a sky. A cloud is a cloud. Cold air moves in, warm air rises, rain falls, and the atmosphere carries on in broad, familiar patterns. But the air is never truly simple. Even when it looks calm, it can shape matter into forms so neat or so strange that they feel almost too deliberate to be natural. One example is the formation of nearly perfect ice spheres. Under certain cold conditions, small balls of ice can appear with surprising smoothness and roundness, even without the violent churn of a hailstorm. Layers of moisture can freeze around a tiny center and build outward gradually, or gentle rolling across icy surfaces can help round them further. The result can be a field or shoreline scattered with pale little spheres that look made by hand rather than weather. What makes them so striking is their calmness. We expect dramatic shapes from dramatic storms, but here the atmosphere works softly, and still it produces geometry that seems almost careful. The sky can also create sound where no storm appears to exist at all. There are many reports, going back centuries, of sudden booming noises under clear or nearly clear skies. These sounds are sometimes called skyquakes or clear sky booms. In some cases, they may come from distant waves, small atmospheric shock effects, hidden thunder traveling unusually far, or shifts in temperature layers that bend and carry sound in odd ways. In other cases, the cause is harder to pin down. The boom is heard, the sky remains open, and no obvious source follows. That is part of what makes it linger in the mind. A person hears something like distant cannon fire or a sharp rolling crack, then looks up and finds blue light, thin clouds, or evening stillness. The air, which seemed so empty a moment earlier, briefly reveals that it has structures and pathways the eye cannot read. Clouds too can behave with an elegance that feels unreal when it first appears. Spiral cloud forms sometimes emerge in otherwise gentle conditions, curling into shapes that look almost drawn. These patterns can form when rotating air, humidity, and stable layers meet at just the right balance. A slight twist in the atmosphere, usually invisible, suddenly becomes visible because water vapor gathers along its motion. The result can be a pale spiral suspended in open sky, delicate and brief, like a signature written in vapor. It is one of the most beautiful reminders that the air is full of motion, even when it seems still. We notice only the rare moments when that motion gathers enough moisture, enough light, enough form to show itself. Higher still, in parts of the atmosphere far above ordinary weather, brief flashes of light can appear over storms or in regions where the connection to familiar lightning is not immediately obvious. These are not the usual bolts seen between cloud and ground. In the upper atmosphere, there can be huge, fleeting luminous events, red or blue flashes, upward-reaching forms, and expanding shapes that appear for only an instant. They are now known to science, but for a long time they seemed almost mythical because they happened too high and too quickly for easy observation. What is calming about them is not only their rarity, but their scale. Far above the rain, above the cloud tops, above the place where most daily weather seems to end, the atmosphere is still active. It is still responding to charge, pressure, motion, and imbalance. The sky is not a flat ceiling over the world. It is a deep layered ocean of gases, currents, and quiet tensions, rising much farther than human instinct usually imagines. Taken together, these facts change the emotional shape of the air. It is not a blank space between Earth and stars. It can round ice into near-perfect spheres. It can carry unexplained booms through clear light. It can draw spirals from moisture. It can flash high above storms in forms no ordinary glance would expect. And yet none of this feels violent in the way we often imagine atmospheric power. Much of it is subtle, brief, easily missed. The air does not always reveal its complexity in thunderheads or heavy rain. Sometimes it does so through a single unexpected sound, a precise shape, a brief flash far above the ordinary weather line. So the sky, like the forest floor before it, is full of hidden processes working quietly beyond casual notice. It only appears empty because so much of what it does remains invisible until the right moment. And once that becomes clear, it is easier to look back down toward the ground with fresh attention, because the earth beneath that sky is no simpler. It hums, shifts, and hides its own impossible-seeming patterns below our feet. Once the sky begins to feel active, the earth below it changes too. Ground often seems like the most dependable part of the world. The sky shifts, water moves, air drifts. But stone appears to rest. Soil seems to wait. A hillside looks settled into itself, as though the land has already said everything it needs to say. Yet the ground is not silent, and it is not completely still. In fact, the planet produces a constant low hum, a deep background vibration that continues even when there are no obvious earthquakes underway. This hum is far below the range of ordinary human hearing, but sensitive instruments can detect it. Part of it seems to come from the interaction of ocean waves with the seafloor and continental edges. When vast bodies of water press and release against the shape of the planet, they generate subtle vibrations that travel through the crust. But even after scientists account for known sources, the picture remains layered and imperfect. The Earth is not only quiet rock underfoot. It is a body in slow motion, carrying a low mechanical song through itself day and night. That idea alone changes the feeling of a landscape. A field at dusk, a forest path, a stretch of stone warmed by the sun. None of it is as still as it seems. Beneath the rooted plants and shallow soils, the crust is under tension, pressure, and motion so gradual that the eye cannot follow it. Yet the instruments can. The planet is always murmuring somewhere below ordinary awareness. Magnetism adds another kind of unease to the ground. In certain valleys and isolated places, people have long reported that compasses begin to behave strangely. Needles drift, hesitate, or point in directions that do not match the expected shape of the land. In many cases, magnetic minerals in the local rock help explain these odd readings. Iron-rich formations, buried deposits, and complex geological structures can distort the magnetic field over short distances. What makes this feel uncanny is the scale of it. A person can move only a few steps and the needle changes again, as though invisible currents are passing through the stone. The valley itself may look completely ordinary. Trees stand still. A stream moves through grass. Rock faces sit under the same quiet light as everywhere else. But the field of direction, something most people trust without thinking, has become locally unreliable. The land is not moving in the visible sense. It is bending orientation itself, just enough to be felt through a small trembling instrument in the hand. Deeper underground, there are rhythms that do not line up neatly with the geological cycles scientists expect. In some boreholes and subterranean monitoring stations, sensors have picked up repeating pulses or slow fluctuations that persist over long periods without matching the timing of known earthquakes, tides, or obvious human activity. Some of these may come from fluid moving through deep cracks, from pressure adjustments in rock layers, or from slow interactions between heat and structure below the surface. But not every pattern fits comfortably into a single explanation. That is part of what makes them so gentle and unsettling at the same time. The planet does not only move in sudden events. It also keeps time through long hidden processes that are difficult to witness directly. Far below the topsoil and roots, the earth may be shifting in tiny repeated ways, almost like breathing in a sleep too deep for the surface to notice. Even rocks, which seem like the purest symbol of stillness, can behave in ways that feel unexpectedly alive. Under certain pressures, temperatures, or chemical conditions, some rocks emit faint pulses of energy. These can be electrical, thermal, or mechanical, and they may arise from crystal structures adjusting, from tiny fractures opening and closing, or from fluids interacting inside the rock. Certain minerals, especially those with piezoelectric properties, can generate electric charges when stressed. In laboratories and in nature, this means a stone can respond to pressure not only by cracking or shifting, but by releasing a detectable signal. The effect is usually faint. No one standing on a hillside would sense a boulder softly giving off tiny pulses. But the possibility changes the emotional shape of stone. It is not truly inert in the absolute way we often imagine. It holds structure. It stores stress. It answers pressure with more than silence. Taken together, these facts make the ground feel less like a dead stage and more like a slow, deep system under constant negotiation. The earth hums below hearing. Valleys can twist direction through hidden minerals. Underground spaces can keep mysterious rhythms. Rocks themselves can respond to stress with energy too delicate for ordinary notice. None of this turns the landscape into something dramatic. If anything, it makes it more restful. The planet is not dead beneath us. It is active in deep time, moving slowly enough that its complexity often feels like peace. A slope of stone, a dark valley, a plain of soil. All of it may be full of subtle processes continuing without hurry. And once that slower kind of strangeness becomes familiar, it becomes easier to understand how entire landscapes can begin to behave in ways that seem to ignore common sense. Not because nature is breaking its rules, but because we are only just beginning to notice how many rules there are. Once the ground begins to feel active, whole landscapes start to seem a little less obedient too. Places that look calm from a distance can behave in ways that seem completely unreasonable up close. A flat desert can move stone. A river can appear to change its mind. A dark slope can hold shadows that feel detached from whatever should be casting them. And a small pool of water can remain where heat seems to promise that it should have vanished long ago. One of the most famous examples is the movement of stones across dry desert floors. In certain places, rocks have been found with long tracks trailing behind them, as though they slowly slid across the ground by themselves. For years, this looked almost impossible. The land was flat, the stones were heavy. There were no obvious animal marks and often no witnesses. But careful studies showed that under rare conditions, a thin layer of water can freeze into delicate sheets of ice around the rocks. When sunlight returns and light winds begin to move across the surface, those thin floating panels can push the stones along the slick mud, slowly enough to seem silent, but steadily enough to leave long trails behind. What makes the sight so strange is not only the motion, but the delay. A stone does not move every day. It can sit in one place for long periods, then shift only under a narrow combination of temperature, water, ice, and wind. The desert appears still, yet it has moments when even rock can glide. Rivers can also behave in ways that feel backward. In some places, water has been seen to stall, hesitate, or briefly move upstream. Sometimes this happens because of pressure waves, strong winds, tidal effects, or the shape of the surrounding terrain. In other cases, a downstream obstruction or sudden change in water level can create a temporary reversal near the surface. The usual direction of flow remains the deeper truth of the river, but for a short time, what the eye sees can feel entirely wrong. A quiet stream or broad river already carries a kind of certainty. Water goes downhill. That seems beyond argument. And yet the landscape can create conditions where the surface tells a more complicated story. A few ripples begin moving the wrong way. Leaves drift upstream. The river looks as though it is reconsidering gravity, even if only for a moment. There are also isolated water pools in hot places that seem to resist evaporation more than expected. Under strong sunlight, shallow exposed water should gradually disappear, and often it does. But some pools persist far longer than ordinary intuition suggests. Part of the reason may lie in mineral content, subsurface cooling, very slight replenishment from underground seepage, or thin surface films that reduce how quickly water escapes into the air. In some cases, rock shape and airflow create small protective conditions that are easy to miss unless measured carefully. So a pool surrounded by dry earth or stone may not be as isolated as it looks. The landscape may be feeding it from below, shading it with air movement, or slowing its loss through chemistry too subtle to see. What appears to be a simple bowl of trapped water can turn out to be the visible tip of a hidden system. Shadows can become strange as well. In some mountain regions and on certain slopes, dark forms have been reported moving across rock faces or hillsides in ways that seem oddly independent. Sometimes these effects may come from thin cloud layers far out of view, shifting air densities that bend light, or very specific angles of sun and terrain that create moving dark patches with unusually sharp edges. In other cases, temperature layers near the ground may help create visual distortions that make a shadow seem detached from any obvious source. The unsettling part is how ordinary the setting can be. A bright slope, a quiet afternoon, a steady sun, and yet a dark shape drifts where it does not seem to belong. The mountain remains exactly where it was, but the light on it begins to behave more like a moving surface than a fixed one. Taken together, these landscapes seem to break simple rules. Stones move, rivers hesitate, pools endure, shadows drift. But what they really reveal is not disorder. It is hidden complexity. The desert is not empty. The river is not just a line of flow. A pool is not only what it appears to contain. A slope is not merely rock under light. Each landscape holds layers of condition, timing, and interaction too delicate for casual notice. And once that becomes clear, the land begins to feel less silent and more expressive. Not in words, but in motions and effects that only appear when enough small forces align. Which makes it especially fitting that the next layer of strangeness in nature is not only seen, but heard. Because some of the most beautiful, impossible-seeming facts are the ones where the world begins to make music without meaning to. Once landscapes begin to feel less silent, sound starts to seem different too. We often imagine music as something shaped by intention, by breath, hands, strings, wood, metal, memory. A note seems to belong to a singer, an instrument, or at least a living choice. But the natural world does not need intention in order to produce something that sounds eerily musical. Wind, ice, rock, and sand can all become part of acoustic events so clear and so expressive that they seem almost composed. Deserts are one of the strangest examples. In certain places, dunes can sing. When dry sand grains of the right size and shape begin sliding together in large numbers, they can produce low humming or booming tones. The sound may be deep and steady, almost like a distant cello note, or the drawn-out vibration of a great hidden drum. What matters is not only movement, but the fine balance of the grains themselves. If the sand is too damp, too rough, too mixed in size, or too disturbed, the effect may vanish. But when the conditions align, a slope of sand can begin to sound as though the desert itself has found a voice. There is something especially calming about this because the sound is not violent. It rises from countless small contacts, grain against grain, each one too tiny to hear alone, but together forming a tone large enough to fill the air. The dune is not alive in the animal sense, yet it briefly behaves like an instrument. Glaciers offer a colder version of the same strangeness. Travelers and researchers in icy regions have sometimes heard deep moans, high ringing tones, or soft singing sounds emerging from ice. Some of these sounds come from meltwater moving through narrow channels inside the glacier, where pressure and shape turn flowing water into a kind of hidden flute. Others come from cracking, shifting, or slow adjustments in the ice itself. Temperature changes, internal stress, and movement across rock can all contribute. The result can be a soundscape that feels far too expressive for something that appears, from a distance, completely still. A glacier in pale light already feels quiet enough to belong to another planet. When it begins to hum or call out in long tones, the sense of distance deepens. The ice is not simply frozen water laid motionless across a valley. It is a slow body under pressure, adjusting itself through fractures, melt channels, and weight. Mountains, too, can produce tones under the right conditions. Wind moving across hollows, ridges, loose stone, ice films, and narrow openings can generate low hums or clearer notes that seem to emerge from the landscape itself. In some places, the combination of slope, rock shape, temperature, and airflow creates sounds so pure that they feel less like weather and more like resonance. A person standing among stone and sky may hear something like a long breath passing through a vast unseen chamber. Again, what makes the sound feel unreal is not that it is loud, but that it is so shaped. Mountains seem massive, silent, and fixed, yet they can become acoustic structures, gathering the movement of air and returning it as tone. A high ridge under changing wind is not only a visual form, it is an instrument waiting for the right invisible hand. Caves bring this idea even closer. In some cave systems, echoes return in altered pitches, layered tones, or strange chord-like responses that do not resemble the original sound very closely at all. Part of this comes from geometry. Sound reflects off stone, travels through narrow passages, strikes chambers of different shapes, and loses or strengthens certain frequencies along the way. A clap or call sent into darkness may come back lower, higher, longer, or richer than expected. The cave does not simply repeat, it reshapes. This gives the underground world a feeling of hidden voice. A cave can seem to answer, not in language, but in transformed sound. Stone bends the path of vibration the way a valley bends wind or a dune organizes sand. What returns to the ear is still your sound, but not exactly. It has been carried through mineral shapes and given back in a changed form. Taken together, these places reveal that music does not always need a musician. Sand can hum. Ice can sing. Mountains can resonate. Caves can answer in altered tones. None of these sounds were written down or rehearsed. They emerge from pressure, movement, structure, and chance aligning in ways that happen to touch the human ear as music-like. And perhaps that is why they are so memorable. They suggest that the world is not only full of forms and surfaces, but of hidden resonance. The land does not merely sit beneath us. Sometimes it answers itself through sound, as if motion and structure were enough to generate their own kind of song. And once that idea settles in, it becomes easier to imagine that water, too, might hold impossible-seeming sounds and lights of its own, waiting quietly beneath the surface. From a distance, water often appears simple. A lake lies still. The sea reflects the sky. A waterfall falls. And that seems to be the whole story. Even when water is powerful, it often looks clean in its behavior. It flows, it gathers, it freezes, it evaporates. Compared with rock, cloud, or forest, it can seem almost easy to understand. But water hides some of the strangest facts in the natural world. One of the most beautiful is the sea's ability to glow at night. In some parts of the ocean, enormous areas of water have been reported shining softly after dark, not in scattered sparkles, but in broad luminous stretches that can extend across astonishing distances. Some glowing seas are linked to bioluminescent organisms, especially bacteria or plankton, whose chemical light gathers under the right conditions into a steady, pale brightness. Sailors have described these events as if the ocean had become milk blue or silver from within, with waves, wakes, and even the edges of ships outlined in silent light. What makes the sight feel so unreal is the scale. A glowing insect or mushroom already feels unusual, but a glowing ocean seems far too large to belong to the same idea. And yet it does. Countless tiny living things, each carrying its own faint chemistry, can combine until the water itself seems illuminated. Lakes can also produce strange light, even when no obvious bioluminescent life is present. In some remote places, observers have reported soft glows or lingering radiance across lake surfaces at night, with no clear sign of the usual organisms responsible. In certain cases, unusual chemistry, suspended particles, minerals, or subtle biological activity may help explain the effect. In others, the cause remains less certain. A lake that looked quiet and dark at sunset may, under the right conditions, begin holding a pale sheen after full darkness settles in. The calmness of it is part of the mystery. A lake already has a reflective inward quality. When it begins to seem faintly self-lit, it feels as though the water is no longer merely receiving the world around it, but answering it with its own light. Waterfalls offer a more restless kind of strangeness. Under some conditions, especially in mist-heavy air and shifting light, observers have described drifting orbs or glowing shapes near falling water. Part of this may come from droplets catching and scattering light in highly specific ways, especially where air currents and spray remain dense. Fine mist can act almost like a moving screen, holding tiny flashes, pale halos, or hovering points that seem briefly detached from the ordinary logic of reflection. The result can look almost alive, even when it is only water, air, and light interacting at a level too delicate for quick explanation. That is often the pattern with water. It does not need to violate physics to look impossible. It only needs the right combination of motion, particles, darkness, and angle. A waterfall in dim light can become a place where ordinary optics briefly seem too elegant to be real. And deeper still, far below the brightness of waves and shorelines, the ocean carries sounds and pulses that remain difficult to explain fully. Deep-sea sensors have picked up bursts, roars, low tones, and repeating signals from the abyss, some of which can be traced to shifting ice, undersea earthquakes, volcanic activity, or the movements of large animals. But not every sound fits neatly into those categories at first. The deep ocean is vast, pressurized, dark, and still only partly explored. Sound travels through it with extraordinary reach, and events from far away can arrive transformed by distance and water structure. So a hydrophone resting in darkness may record something that sounds almost deliberate, a rise, a pulse, a long-distant cry, even when the source turns out to be geological or environmental, rather than alive. The ocean is not only a place of movement above, it is also a place of immense acoustic space below, where pressure and distance carry hidden events through black water for miles. Taken together, these facts change the feeling of water. The sea can shine across huge stretches at night. Lakes can seem to glow with no obvious source. Waterfalls can produce drifting luminous effects from mist and light. The deep ocean can carry sounds so strange that they feel almost fictional before they are understood. None of this makes water less familiar. If anything, it makes its familiarity feel more earned. We drink it, watch it, cross it, and live beside it, but it never becomes fully ordinary. It remains one of the most responsive substances on Earth, always taking shape, always reflecting, always carrying chemistry, light, and sound into combinations that can feel impossible until they are seen. And in colder parts of the world, where water changes state and falls silent into ice and snow, it becomes stranger still. Once water becomes ice, the world seems to simplify. Movement slows, sound softens, surfaces harden. Snow spreads a kind of silence across the land, and frozen lakes or glaciers can look almost complete in their stillness, as though cold had erased complexity and left only shape behind. But cold does not erase strangeness. It often sharpens it. In snowy or icy places, observers sometimes notice points of light drifting or flickering across the surface that do not behave quite like ordinary reflections. Some of this comes from the structure of snow itself. Snow is not a smooth blanket, but a field of countless crystals, edges, and tiny trapped spaces for air and light. Under specific conditions, those crystals can catch faint light and redirect it in concentrated flashes. A snowfield at dusk or beneath a dim sky may seem briefly alive with moving glimmers, even when there is no obvious source strong enough to explain them at first glance. The movement can make the effect feel especially unreal. A fixed reflection is easy to understand, but when the sparkle seems to shift softly across the surface, the snow begins to feel less like frozen ground and more like a delicate screen responding to light too subtle for the eye to fully track. Cold landscapes often do this. They take ordinary optics and make them feel newly unfamiliar. Lakes under deep winter can become even stranger. In some places, frozen lakes develop huge natural patterns of interlocking shapes, including hexagonal cracks that spread across the ice in broad geometric fields. These forms arise as ice expands and contracts with changing temperature. Stress builds, releases, and reorganizes. Because hexagons distribute that stress efficiently, the surface can fracture into repeating patterns that feel almost designed. Seen from above or across a wide frozen expanse, the lake can look as though it has been tiled by geometry rather than frozen by weather. What is calming about this is the patience of the process. Nothing is rushed. A small change in temperature, a shift in tension, a slight movement through the ice, and the pattern gradually emerges. The frozen lake is not only still water made hard, it is a surface holding memory of pressure, cold, and time. Glaciers, too, continue to speak in cold regions. They were mentioned earlier as singing bodies of ice, and here in frozen landscapes, that strangeness returns with even greater force. A glacier may look completely silent from a distance, pale and motionless under dim light. But inside it are channels, stresses, fractures, and slow movement. Meltwater can pass through hidden paths. Ice can settle against rock. Tension can release in tones that sound like hums, creaks, ringing notes, or long-distant calls. In extreme quiet, those sounds make a glacier feel less like an object and more like a slow event still unfolding. This is part of what gives cold places their otherworldly quality. They seem empty, but they are full of processes happening below visibility. Ice is not dead calm. It is structure under pressure. And sometimes cold itself remains where it seems it should not. In certain open landscapes, small frozen patches can persist much longer than the surrounding terrain suggests. These cold spots may stay icy even when nearby ground has thawed. Air drainage, underground channels, unusual soil composition, trapped shade, or hidden moisture can all help maintain them. Cold air is dense and can settle into hollows or spaces that keep it from mixing easily with warmer air nearby. The result is a tiny local climate, almost like a pocket of another season surviving inside the larger one. A person walking through such a place may see ordinary grass, stone, or soil all around, and then suddenly reach a patch where frost still clings, or the ground remains hard with cold. The change feels too local to be weather in the broad sense. It feels intimate, as though the landscape has folded a small reserve of winter into itself and refused to let it go. Taken together, these facts make frozen places feel less empty and more finely structured. Snow can gather wandering glimmers of light. Lakes can organize themselves into broad geometric patterns. Glaciers can sing from within their own weight and motion. Frozen patches can persist in hidden balance with air and stone. Cold does not remove activity. It changes its pace. It makes the world quieter, sharper, and sometimes more visibly precise. A frozen landscape can look stripped down to its simplest form. Yet inside that simplicity are optics, pressure, structure, and hidden persistence working all the time. And once the earth begins to feel this strange even in silence, it becomes easier to look upward again, toward the sky beyond it, where space itself begins to offer facts that sound too unreal to belong to the same universe we seem to live in every day. After snow, ice, and silence, the sky feels like the natural next step. Cold landscapes already seem a little unreal when the light fades and the horizon opens. Then the stars begin to appear, and the strangeness deepens. Space often looks fictional even before you learn anything about it. The darkness feels too large. The distances feel too severe. The light arriving from above already seems like something that should belong to imagination. And yet the truth is often stranger than the look of it. Some stars, for example, dim in patterns that seem almost wrong. We tend to imagine stars as steady points of light, perhaps twinkling because of Earth's atmosphere, but otherwise simple and dependable. Yet there are stars whose brightness drops in irregular ways that are difficult to explain neatly at first. A passing planet can dim a star in a predictable pattern. Dust can soften the light too. But in some cases, astronomers have seen stars fade by unusual amounts, or in uneven sequences that do not immediately fit the simplest models. The star is still there, still burning far away, but something about the changing light feels too strange for the quiet point of brightness the eye sees from Earth. What makes this so calming to think about is the gentleness of the evidence. No one hears the star do this. No one watches it directly in real time with human sight. Instead, instruments trace the slow rise and fall of distant light, and from those soft changes a mystery begins to form. A star can look perfectly ordinary in the sky and still behave in ways that stretch explanation. Then there are the dark clouds of space, which may be even stranger because they are not really seen in the usual sense at all. In some parts of the galaxy, enormous clouds of dust and gas block so much light that they appear as dark shapes against richer star fields behind them. They are not holes in space. They are regions full of matter, but matter so dense and cold that it hides what lies beyond. A patch of sky that looks empty may in fact be crowded with unseen structure. This reverses the ordinary feeling of vision in a beautiful way. On Earth, darkness often suggests absence. In space, darkness can mean the opposite. It can mean there is so much material gathered there that light cannot easily pass through. The black shape is not emptiness, it is a veil. Far beyond our galaxy, space also sends brief radio signals that still puzzle astronomers. These are known as fast radio bursts, and they arrive as extremely short pulses of energy, often lasting only tiny fractions of a second. Despite their briefness, they can carry immense power. Some appear once and never repeat. Others return in patterns that are still being studied. By the time they reach Earth, they have traveled across astonishing distances, yet they arrive sharp enough to be measured and compared. The strange part is not only that they exist, but that the universe is capable of making such brief and intense signals at all. Something very real is happening out there, something energetic and physical, and yet from our point of view, it first appears only as a sudden mark in data, a whisper from far beyond direct human scale. The night sky seems still, but it is full of events that move through it faster and more violently than the eye could ever guess. Even when pieces of space fall to Earth, they can remain difficult to fully understand. Some meteorites contain internal structures unlike anything most people would expect from a simple rock. Certain ones show intricate metallic patterns formed by slow cooling over immense spans of time inside ancient parent bodies. Others hold minerals or textures that feel unfamiliar compared with ordinary stones from Earth. When cut open, they can look less like rough fragments and more like preserved records of conditions that no longer exist around us. So a meteorite resting in a museum case, small and silent under steady light, may contain the trace of ancient cosmic environments far older than any landscape on Earth. Taken together, these facts make the night sky feel even less ordinary than it already looks. Stars can dim in bizarre ways. Darkness in space can mean hidden abundance, not absence. Fast radio bursts can cross the universe in brief flashes of signal. Meteorites can carry patterns shaped in ancient worlds long gone. None of this turns space into fantasy. It does something better. It makes space feel more real by showing how little of its reality fits our first instincts. The sky only looks calm because distance smooths everything out. But beyond that smoothness are strange light curves, hidden clouds, sudden radio pulses, and fragments of vanished worlds. The deeper attention moves into space, the more gentle and unsettling the facts become. Nearby strangeness can still be pictured as a place, a rock, a signal, a visible object. But farther out, the facts begin to change shape. They become less about what something looks like and more about what can never quite be reached, or what can only be known indirectly. Space does not grow simpler as it expands. It grows quieter and more difficult, which somehow makes it feel stranger still. One of the most astonishing facts is that there are places in the universe whose light will never reach us. This is not simply because they are very far away. Distance alone is not the whole issue. The universe is expanding, and over great enough scales, some regions are receding from us in such a way that the light they emit now will never cross the growing gap. Even if our instruments improve forever, even if human curiosity lasted as long as stars themselves, some events would remain permanently beyond view. That means the night sky is not merely incomplete in the ordinary sense. It is incomplete by design of the universe itself. There are real things happening right now, perhaps stars forming, galaxies shifting, light being released into darkness, and none of it will ever arrive here. The universe contains scenes that exist fully, yet remain forever outside our possible experience. It is hard to think of a quieter kind of distance than that. Some stars, especially in the earliest eras of cosmic history, may also have formed under conditions unlike anything common today. The first stars likely emerged in a universe with almost no heavy elements, built mostly from hydrogen and helium. Without the richer chemical mix found in later cosmic ages, those ancient stars may have grown much larger and burned much hotter than many stars around us now. Their lives may have been short, brilliant, and unlike the calmer patterns more familiar in the modern sky. What makes this feel so unreal is the age of it. The universe did not always produce the same kinds of stars under the same conditions. There were older chapters in which the rules of formation were working with different materials. A star in the deep past may have been shaped by a simpler and harsher kind of abundance, glowing in a sky that contained far less of what later generations of stars would create. And beyond even that, there may be entire regions of the universe that are permanently unobservable to us, not only because their current light cannot reach us, but because the total structure of the cosmos extends beyond what any future observation could ever fully map. We see only the observable universe, the region from which light has had time to arrive since cosmic history began as we know it. But what lies beyond that boundary may go on much farther, perhaps endlessly, perhaps in ways shaped differently than our own local patch. The important point is not that these unseen regions must contain exotic laws or dramatic impossibilities. They may be ordinary by cosmic standards. The strange part is simply that they exist beyond confirmation. Reality, on the largest scale, is likely bigger than evidence can fully hold. There is more than can be gathered. Black holes bring a different kind of difficulty. They are not merely far away. They are places where gravity becomes so strong that ordinary paths out of them disappear beyond a certain boundary. And yet, one of the deepest puzzles in modern physics suggests that information about what falls into a black hole may not be lost completely. Somehow, in ways not yet fully understood, the universe may preserve that information. The black hole looks like a place where detail should vanish forever, but the deeper theories suggest otherwise. So even here, where darkness seems most final, the truth may be more careful than it first appears. What disappears may not be gone in the simple sense. It may be held, transformed, or encoded in ways we are still trying to understand. Taken together, these facts make space feel both larger and softer. Light can fail to arrive not because it is weak, but because the universe itself keeps widening. Ancient stars may have belonged to a harsher and simpler age. Entire cosmic regions may exist beyond any possible view. Black holes may hide but not erase what falls into them. And once those ideas begin to settle, space no longer feels like a backdrop full of objects. It begins to feel like a reality so wide and structured that our everyday language only brushes against it. Even words like distance, darkness, and emptiness start to feel too small for what is really there. When space is pictured from far enough away, ordinary words begin to lose some of their grip. We still say emptiness, distance, time, gravity, structure. The words are useful. They help us begin. But they also carry quiet assumptions shaped by life on Earth. Empty space sounds like nothing. Time sounds like a single steady flow. Gravity sounds like one simple pull. And structure sounds as though it should fit inside something the eye could imagine. The universe keeps softening those assumptions. Space, for one thing, may not be truly empty at all. Even what we call vacuum is not necessarily a pure absence. Modern physics describes empty space as filled with fields, the underlying structures through which particles and forces operate. So the quiet darkness between stars is not just a blank void waiting to be crossed. It may be more like a stage already occupied by invisible activity, subtle fluctuations, and the conditions that allow matter and light to exist in the forms we know. The night between galaxies looks like nothing, but its nothingness may be far busier than the word suggests. This changes the emotional shape of darkness. A dark stretch of sky is not merely a gap between visible objects. It may be full of invisible structure, like a room that appears empty only because the eye cannot see the currents moving through it. Time also becomes less straightforward the farther we go. In daily life, time feels shared. Morning becomes afternoon. A shadow shifts. A minute passes the same way for everyone in the room. But in the universe at large, time does not pass identically everywhere. According to relativity, gravity and motion affect the rate at which time passes. Clocks run slightly differently depending on speed and on the strength of the gravitational field they sit within. Near a massive object, time moves more slowly relative to places farther away. For objects moving at great speed, time also changes compared with slower observers. This is not poetry or metaphor. It is measurable. Satellites, for example, must account for these effects in order to keep systems accurate. What feels impossible about it is how gently it enters real life. Time does not shatter. It does not announce its flexibility. It simply turns out to be less universal than instinct suggests. A clock in one place and a clock in another may not be living through the same depth of time after all. Gravity, too, may be stranger on enormous scales than our daily experience prepares us to expect. The falling of an apple, the motion of the moon, the path of a thrown object, all give gravity a familiar face. But when astronomers study galaxies, galaxy clusters, and the expansion of the universe itself, gravity becomes harder to pin down in a simple way. Some of its large-scale behavior appears tied to unseen matter, and some observations continue to raise questions about whether our models are complete at the widest scales. The force that feels so dependable in ordinary life may have layers of behavior that only appear across impossible distances. So a galaxy drifting through darkness is not only following the same rule that pulls rain downward, it may also be revealing subtler truths about gravity that only emerge when space becomes vast enough. And then there are the structures themselves. On the largest observable scales, matter is not arranged randomly. Galaxies gather into clusters, clusters into filaments and sheets, with enormous voids between them. The resulting pattern is often called the cosmic web. It stretches across distances so large that the word structure begins to feel too small, because no ordinary building, mountain range, or ocean gives us a real comparison. These formations are not simply big. They are large in a way that strains the imagination's sense of proportion. A map of cosmic structure can look almost biological, like nerves or branching tissue. Yet it is made of galaxies separated by vast darkness. What seems at first like scattered light points in the night turns out to be part of a much larger arrangement, one that no human eye could ever directly take in from within. Taken together, these facts make the universe feel less like an enlarged version of everyday life, and more like something that only partly fits the language we brought to it. Empty space may not be empty. Time may not pass evenly. Gravity may reveal deeper layers on immense scales. Structure may grow so vast that comparison starts to fail. And after a while, that scale becomes restful in its own way. The universe does not become simpler when explained. It becomes more delicate, more layered, and more patient. And from that cosmic wideness, it becomes possible to return to the small, familiar world again, where even sound, silence, and time inside daily life turn out to be stranger than they seem. After the scale of the universe, it is calming to return to things that seem much smaller. A room, a voice, a quiet moment, the soft passing of a second, sound entering the ear, silence settling after it. These feel close and understandable, almost modest compared with galaxies and black holes. And yet, even here, reality remains more intricate than it first appears. The quietest sound a human ear can detect is extraordinarily small. At the threshold of hearing, the movement of the eardrum is so tiny, it is difficult to picture in any ordinary way. It shifts by an amount smaller than the width of many atoms. And still, the ear can respond. That faint motion passes through tiny bones in the middle ear, into fluid inside the inner ear, where delicate hair cells bend and begin turning vibration into nerve signals. The result is that a whisper, a faint breath of sound, or the softest distant rustle can become part of awareness, even though the physical movement involved is almost impossibly slight. This means hearing is not only about loudness, it is about precision. The ear is not a blunt receiver waiting for force. It is a careful structure tuned to respond to movements so small they seem almost beneath imagination. The brain also locates sound using differences in timing that are nearly too tiny to believe. When a noise comes from one side, it reaches one ear a little before the other. The difference may be measured in microseconds, millionths of a second, and yet the brain can use that tiny delay, along with differences in loudness, to estimate direction. A branch cracks to the left. A voice comes from behind. A footstep lands farther away than expected. The mind arranges these impressions so quickly that it feels effortless. But behind that effortless feeling is astonishing sensitivity. The room does not come labeled with direction. The brain calculates direction from timing so small that conscious thought never notices the work. Sound becomes location through delicate comparisons made in silence between two ears. Time, too, remains less simple than it feels. Earlier, fear made moments seem larger by filling them with more detail. But even outside fear, time perception shifts constantly depending on attention, novelty, repetition, and emotion. A new place may feel long while you are in it, because the mind is gathering fresh information. A familiar routine may pass quickly, because less stands out to be recorded. Waiting can stretch time. Absorption can shrink it. A quiet evening can feel spacious, while a busy hour may disappear almost at once. The clock continues its steady motion, but live time does not always match it. What the mind experiences as long or short often depends on how dense the moment feels from within. Time is measured by instruments, but it is also shaped by awareness. Even silence is less empty than it first appears. What we call silence is often not the absence of sound, but the filtering of sound. The hum of distant appliances, air movement, faint traffic, a settling building, the body's own breath. All may continue around us while the brain gradually lowers their importance. This process is one reason familiar background noise can seem to disappear until something unusual breaks through it. The ear keeps receiving, but the mind becomes selective. So a quiet room at night is rarely truly silent. It is full of low signals that have been softened by familiarity. Silence, in that sense, can be understood as a kind of gentle editing. Not a blank state, but a reduced one. The world still vibrates softly around you. Awareness simply stops holding each sound up to the light. Taken together, these facts return the strange beauty of the universe back to daily life. Sound begins in motions almost too small to picture. Direction emerges from timing almost too brief to feel. Time stretches and contracts through attention. Silence often turns out to be filtered presence rather than true absence. None of this makes the ordinary world less trustworthy. It makes it more textured. A faint noise, a passing minute, a quiet room, all carry hidden processes beneath their simplicity. The familiar does not become less real when explained. It becomes more finely made. And once that begins to settle in, it becomes easier to see that even the most ordinary sensations of daily life, coolness, smell, music in the mind, balance in the body, still hold their own impossible seeming truths waiting quietly inside them. By this point, the strange has appeared in deserts, glaciers, forests, oceans, stars, and the deep structure of space itself. But there is something especially calming about ending close to home again, with small familiar things. A leaf of mint, a remembered smell, a song that seems to play inside the mind. The simple fact of standing upright without thinking about how. These do not look mysterious at first. They belong to daily life so completely that they can pass unnoticed for years. And yet even here, the impossible feeling remains. Mint is a simple place to begin. When mint feels cool on the tongue or skin, the temperature is not actually dropping in the way most people imagine. The cooling sensation comes from compounds like menthol, which activate receptors that normally respond to cold. The nervous system receives a message that resembles coolness, and the body experiences it as such, even though the underlying temperature may not have changed much at all. A leaf, a tea, a piece of gum, and suddenly the mouth feels as if fresh air has entered it. What is so gentle about this fact is that it reveals how experience can be real without being literal. The coolness is not fake. It is felt. But it is produced by chemistry, nudging the body's sensing systems in a particular way. Everyday refreshment turns out to be a carefully triggered illusion. Smell opens another quiet door. A familiar scent can unlock memory with surprising force, often more suddenly than sight or sound. Part of the reason lies in the brain itself. Smell is closely linked with regions involved in emotion and memory, which means certain odors can bring back not only an image of the past, but its feeling. A trace of soap, cut grass, old wood, rain on warm ground, or a certain kind of tea can seem to carry years inside it. The room stays the same, but for a moment, the mind is somewhere else entirely. This can feel almost impossible because the trigger is so small. A few drifting molecules in the air, and a forgotten season returns. A childhood kitchen, a hallway, a trip, a winter coat. The past does not physically reappear, and yet something of it rises with unusual clarity. Smell moves quietly, but it reaches deeply. Some people also experience sound in a way that blurs the line between memory and presence. A song can begin playing in the mind so vividly that it feels almost external, with tone, rhythm, and timing still intact. Earworms are common, of course, but in some cases, the inner replay can feel remarkably complete, as though the brain were staging its own small private concert. This happens because neural systems involved in hearing and prediction can reactivate patterns associated with remembered sound, sometimes with surprising richness. So a room may remain silent in the ordinary sense, and yet music can still seem present inside it. Not because the air is carrying vibration, but because the nervous system is reconstructing the shape of sound from memory. The experience is internal, but it can feel almost spatial, almost located, as if the boundary between hearing and remembering was softer than expected. Then there is balance, one of the body's quietest achievements. Most people move through the day without thinking much about the hidden structures that keep them upright. Deep inside the inner ear are fluid-filled canals and tiny sensory cells that detect rotation, tilt, and acceleration. As the head moves, the fluid shifts. As the fluid shifts, the body updates its sense of position. Combined with vision and signals from muscles and joints, this lets a person stand, walk, turn, and lean without needing to consciously solve the physics of it all. What makes this feel quietly unreal is how small the system is compared with the experience it supports. The stability of the world, the uprightness of the body, the sense that the floor is below and the ceiling above. All of that depends partly on tiny structures hidden in darkness inside the skull. If those structures are disturbed, the whole world can seem to tilt or spin. Ordinary balance turns out to be a constant, delicate conversation between fluid, motion, and the brain's interpretation of both. Taken together, these facts return the video's strangeness to the level of daily life. Mint can create coolness without true cold. Smell can open memory with almost impossible speed. Music can appear vividly inside silence. Balance can depend on hidden fluid moving through tiny channels in the ear. So the ordinary world remains what it always was, but it no longer feels plain. Even the smallest comforts and habits are built on processes far stranger than they seem. A breath, a flavor, a remembered melody, the feeling of standing still, all of them are quietly shaped by systems so elegant that they can sound made up when first described. By the time night grows this quiet, it becomes easier to notice how little reality ever needed invention. The world did not have to be decorated to become mysterious. It did not have to be exaggerated. It only had to be observed long enough, gently enough, for its smaller truths to come forward. Even something as delicate as a firefly can carry that feeling. In some places, large groups of fireflies begin flashing in near-perfect synchrony. Whole trees and riverbanks pulsing together in waves of light. Each insect is tiny, and each pulse is brief, but together they create a pattern that feels almost impossible at first glance. A forest edge that looked dark a moment ago begins breathing in light. Not random light, but shared rhythm. A living signal spreads softly across the warm air. Far away from those summer woods, another kind of signal moves through another kind of dark. Whales can send low-frequency sound across astonishing distances through the ocean, their calls traveling far beyond what human voices ever could. In deep water, sound can move with remarkable efficiency, and these long, low calls can cross immense stretches of sea. A whale may be alone to the eye, separated by miles of black water from the next visible body, and still be part of an acoustic world much larger than the surface suggests. The ocean, which can seem empty from above, is still carrying presence through it. And on land, long before modern instruments measured the sky, human beings were already paying close attention to patterns larger than themselves. In many ancient places, stones, temples, and passages were aligned with remarkable precision to the sun, stars, solstices, or seasonal shifts in light. A structure built from earth and labor became a way of meeting the sky. This too can feel surprising, not because ancient people were mysterious, but because attention itself can achieve so much when given enough patience. The sky has always been speaking in cycles of light and darkness. People learn to listen with stone. Perhaps that is the quiet thread beneath everything tonight. Much of what feels impossible is simply reality waiting to be noticed. A blind spot gently filled in by the brain. Sand singing under motion. Forest air holding hidden sweetness. A glacier calling through its own pressure. A distant star dimming in a pattern no one expected. A tiny leaf making the mouth feel cold. A memory returning on the strength of scent alone. None of these things had to become less real in order to feel beautiful. And none of them had to become magical in order to feel strange. They were already enough. So as the world begins to soften again around you, it may help to remember that reality is not plain underneath its ordinary surface. It is layered, it is patient, it is full of signals, structures, and quiet processes moving all the time, whether or not anyone is there to name them. The room around you may feel simple now. The air may feel still. The night may seem uneventful. And yet, even here, the same world continues. Light, pressure, memory, motion, time. Small truths moving through larger ones. Familiar things resting on strange foundations. You do not need to hold on to every fact. You do not need to keep the whole map in mind. It is enough to let the feeling remain for a moment longer. That soft sense that the world is deeper than it first appears, stranger than it first appears, and somehow gentler for being so. The quiet was always full of more than silence, and the world was always more intricate than it needed to say out loud.